The sun was just beginning to rise over the quiet streets of Los Angeles when Marcus Kane opened the door to his small apartment. The cool morning air felt fresh against his face as he stepped outside. Next to him stood his best friend in the whole world. Bruno was a beautiful German shepherd with golden brown fur and bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand everything Marcus said to him. Bruno had been living with Marcus for 4 years now. Marcus remembered the day he first saw Bruno at the animal shelter. The dog was sitting alone in a corner looking sad and scared. The shelter workers told Marcus that Bruno had been found on the streets as a puppy. Someone had hurt him badly before he ended up at the shelter. When Marcus looked into those big brown eyes, he knew immediately that they belonged together. From that day forward, Bruno never left Marcus' side. The dog followed him everywhere around the apartment. When Marcus watched television, Bruno would curl up next to him on the couch. When Marcus cooked dinner, Bruno would sit patiently in the kitchen waiting for any scraps that might fall to the floor. At night, Bruno slept on a soft bed right next to Marcus' bed, making sure his human was safe while they both slept. Every morning, Marcus and Bruno took the same walk through their neighborhood. It was their special time together before the busy day started. Marcus loved these quiet moments when it was just the two of them, walking slowly down the sidewalk. Bruno would sniff every tree and fire hydrant they passed, taking his time to investigate all the interesting smells from the night before. The neighborhood where they lived was usually very peaceful. Most of the people who lived there were families with children or older couples who had been living in the same houses for many years. Everyone knew Marcus and Bruno because they walked the same route every single day. The children would wave at them from their front yards, and the older neighbors would smile and say good morning as they passed by. Marcus was not just any ordinary person living in this quiet neighborhood. He was famous around the world for being in action movies. People knew him for playing tough characters who could fight bad guys and drive fast cars. But when he was at home with Bruno, he was just a regular person who loved his dog more than anything else in the world. Bruno made Marcus feel happy and peaceful. Before he found Bruno, Marcus often felt lonely, even though he was surrounded by people when he worked on movies. Having Bruno in his life changed everything. The dog gave him someone to take care of and someone who loved him, no matter what kind of day he had at work. As they walked toward the small park at the end of their street, Bruno's tail started wagging faster. He knew they were getting close to his favorite place in the whole neighborhood. The park had green grass where Bruno could run around and big trees where squirrels liked to play. There was also a small pond where ducks would swim and a playground where children played during the day. Bruno loved meeting other dogs at the park. He was always friendly and gentle with every animal and person they met. Marcus was proud of how well-behaved Bruno was around other people. The dog never barked at strangers or tried to jump on anyone. He would sit calmly next to Marcus and wait patiently to be petted by anyone who wanted to say hello. This morning felt exactly like every other morning they had shared together. Marcus had no idea that in just a few minutes their peaceful world was about to be turned upside down. He had no way of knowing that this beautiful morning walk would become the day that changed everything for both of them forever. As they approached the park entrance, Bruno's tail wagged even faster with excitement for another perfect day. The peaceful morning silence was suddenly broken by the loud roaring sound of motorcycle engines. Marcus looked up from watching Bruno sniff around a tree and saw 5 big motorcycles racing into the park parking lot. The bikes were loud and dirty with chrome parts that reflected the morning sunlight. Black smoke poured out from their exhaust pipes as the riders revved their engines over and over again. The men on the motorcycles looked dangerous and mean. They all wore black leather jackets covered with patches and metal studs. Their faces were rough and unshaven, and most of them had tattoos covering their arms and necks. The biggest man of the group was clearly their leader. He was huge with massive shoulders and arms like tree trunks. On the back of his leather jacket was written the word Tank in big white letters. Tank had a thick black beard and cold dark eyes that seemed to look for trouble wherever he went. His motorcycle was the biggest and loudest of all the bikes. Chrome skulls decorated the handlebars, and a long chain hung from his belt. When he smiled, it was not a friendly smile, but the kind of smile that meant someone was about to get hurt. Bruno immediately sensed that something was wrong. The gentle dog moved closer to Marcus and pressed against his leg. Bruno was usually excited to meet new people, but these men made him feel scared and nervous. His ears went back, and his tail stopped wagging as he watched the bikers climb off their motorcycles. Marcus put his hand gently on Bruno's head to comfort his dog. He could feel Bruno trembling slightly against his leg. Marcus had dealt with dangerous people before in his movies and in his real life, but he always tried to avoid trouble when he was with Bruno. His dog's safety was more important to him than anything else in the world. The 5 bikers spread out across the parking lot and started walking toward Marcus and Bruno. Tank was in the front, leading the group with a mean look on his face. The other bikers followed behind him, laughing and making loud jokes to each other. They were clearly looking for someone to bother, and Marcus and his dog seemed like easy targets. Tank stopped his motorcycle right in front of where Marcus and Bruno were standing. He revved the engine several times, making the loudest noise possible. The sound was so loud it hurt Marcus' ears and made Bruno whimper with fear. Other people in the park started looking in their direction, wondering what was happening. The biker leader climbed off his motorcycle and stood facing Marcus. Tank was even bigger up close than he had looked from far away. He was at least 6.5 feet tall and probably weighed close to 300 pounds. His arms were covered in tattoos of skulls, snakes, and flames. A thick gold chain hung around his neck, and several rings covered his fingers. Tank looked down at Marcus and Bruno with disgust on his face. He seemed angry about something, but Marcus had no idea what they had done wrong. They were just taking a peaceful walk in the park, like they did every morning. Bruno pressed even closer to Marcus' leg, clearly frightened by the big scary man standing in front of them. The other 4 bikers formed a circle around Marcus and Bruno. Now they were trapped with nowhere to go. Marcus could feel his heart beating faster, but he tried to stay calm for Bruno's sake. He had no idea what these men wanted from them, but he could tell by their faces that they were not planning anything good. Tank cracked his knuckles and smiled, that cold, mean smile again. Tank looked down at Marcus and Bruno with pure hatred in his eyes. For some reason, the sight of the peaceful man walking his well-behaved dog made Tank feel angry inside. Maybe it was because his own life was full of chaos and violence, while Marcus seemed to have everything Tank never had. A quiet life, a loyal companion, and respect from his neighbors. The big biker took a step closer to where Marcus and Bruno were standing. Bruno could smell the danger coming from this man. The dog had lived on the streets before Marcus found him, and he remembered what mean people were like. His body started shaking more as Tank moved closer and closer. Marcus tried to stay calm, but he could feel the situation getting worse by the second. He gently pulled Bruno behind him, trying to put himself between his dog and the dangerous man. Marcus had been in fights before, but never when Bruno was with him. His main concern was keeping his beloved dog safe, no matter what happened to him. Tank laughed when he saw Marcus trying to protect Bruno. The sound was cold and cruel, like broken glass scraping against concrete. The other bikers joined in laughing and making jokes about the fancy man and his pretty dog. They had been drinking since early morning and were looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Without any warning, Tank reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a heavy metal chain. The chain was thick and long with sharp edges that caught the morning sunlight. Tank had used this chain many times before to hurt people who got in his way. He wrapped one end around his thick fist and let the rest of the chain dangle down toward the ground. Marcus' eyes went wide when he saw the weapon. He knew immediately that Tank was planning to use it. Marcus stepped further in front of Bruno and held up his hands, trying to show that he did not want to fight. He just wanted to take his dog and leave the park without anyone getting hurt. But Tank was not interested in letting them leave. The big biker was enjoying the fear he saw in Marcus' eyes. Tank loved the feeling of power he got from scaring people who could not fight back. He had spent his whole life being a bully, and today was going to be no different. Tank raised the heavy chain high above his head. Marcus thought the biker was going to hit him with it and got ready to defend himself. But Tank had a different target in mind. Instead of swinging the chain at Marcus, Tank aimed it directly at Bruno. The innocent dog was still pressed against Marcus' leg, trembling with fear. Bruno had never hurt anyone in his entire life. All he had ever done was love Marcus and bring joy to everyone he met. But Tank did not care about any of that. He brought the metal chain down with all his strength right toward Bruno's side. The chain hit Bruno with a terrible sound that Marcus would never forget for the rest of his life. Bruno cried out in pain and fell to the ground hard. His beautiful golden fur was immediately stained with red blood where the chain had struck him. The poor dog tried to get back up, but he was hurt too badly to stand. Marcus' world stopped completely. Everything went silent except for the sound of Bruno whimpering in pain on the ground. Marcus dropped to his knees next to his best friend and saw the terrible injury that Tank had caused. Bruno was bleeding and his breathing was fast and shallow. The bikers all laughed louder than before. Tank was especially pleased with what he had done. He put the bloody chain back in his jacket and smiled down at Marcus and the injured dog. For Tank, this was just another fun morning of causing pain to innocent victims. But Tank had made the biggest mistake of his entire life. Marcus knelt down beside Bruno and gently touched his injured dog. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking from pure anger that was building up inside him like a volcano ready to explode. But Marcus forced himself to stay calm because Bruno needed him right now more than ever before. The bikers were still laughing and making jokes about what Tank had done. They thought it was funny to hurt an innocent animal. Tank was bragging to his friends about how much he enjoyed hitting the fancy dog with his chain. The other bikers cheered and high-fived each other like they had just won some kind of contest. Marcus carefully lifted Bruno in his arms. The dog was still breathing, but he was clearly in a lot of pain. Bruno looked up at Marcus with those big brown eyes that seemed to be asking why someone would hurt him when he had never done anything wrong to anyone. Marcus whispered softly to Bruno, telling him that everything was going to be okay. The bikers watched as Marcus carried Bruno toward his car. Tank called out nasty things, trying to make Marcus angry enough to start a fight. But Marcus did not respond to any of their taunts. He walked slowly and carefully, making sure not to hurt Bruno any more than he already was. Getting his dog to safety was the only thing that mattered right now. Marcus put Bruno gently in the back seat of his car and covered him with a soft blanket he kept there. Bruno whimpered quietly, but seemed to understand that Marcus was trying to help him. Marcus started the car and drove as fast as he safely could to the emergency animal hospital across town. During the drive, Marcus' mind was working like a computer, processing everything that had just happened. The old Marcus from before he became famous had been trained to handle situations exactly like this. Years ago, before he started making movies, Marcus had served in the British Special Forces. He knew how to track people down and how to make them pay for the bad things they had done. At the animal hospital, the veterinarian examined Bruno right away. The doctor told Marcus that Bruno had some broken ribs and cuts from the chain, but he was going to be okay. The dog would need to stay at the hospital for a few hours while they cleaned his wounds and gave him medicine for the pain. While Bruno was being treated, Marcus sat in the waiting room and made several phone calls. His voice was completely calm and steady as he spoke to people he had not talked to in many years. These were old friends from his military days who now worked as security experts and private investigators in different parts of the world. Marcus explained what had happened to Bruno and asked his old friends for help. Every single person he called immediately agreed to assist him. They all knew how much Marcus loved his dog, and they were disgusted by what the bikers had done. These men had all served together in dangerous places around the world, and they never forgot about loyalty and friendship. After making his phone calls, Marcus went online and started searching for information about Tank and his biker gang. He used skills he had learned in the military to hack into databases and security camera systems around the city. Within an hour, Marcus had found out Tank's real name, where he lived, and what crimes he had committed in the past. Tank, whose real name was Derek Mason, had been arrested many times for assault, robbery, and drug dealing. He had hurt many innocent people over the years and had never been properly punished for his crimes. But that was about to change because Derek Mason had finally messed with the wrong person. Marcus looked through the window at Bruno sleeping peacefully after his surgery. The calm expression on Marcus' face hid the storm that was building inside him. While Bruno was resting safely at the animal hospital, Marcus began his hunt for information about Tank and his gang. He drove back to the park where the attack had happened and started talking to people who might have seen what happened or knew something about the bikers. Marcus first approached an elderly woman who was feeding ducks by the pond. Her name was Mrs. Patterson, and she had been coming to this park every morning for the past 15 years. When Marcus showed her a picture of Tank that he had found online, her face immediately filled with fear and anger. Mrs. Patterson told Marcus that Tank and his gang had been terrorizing the neighborhood for months. They would ride their loud motorcycles through quiet streets in the middle of the night, waking up everyone in their homes. They had knocked over trash cans, broken mailboxes, and spray-painted ugly words on walls and fences. The elderly woman started crying as she told Marcus about what happened to her grandson Tommy. Last week, the 10-year-old boy had been playing in his front yard when Tank and 2 other bikers rode by. They stopped and started yelling mean things at little Tommy, making him so scared that he ran inside and would not come out for the rest of the day. Mrs. Patterson said she had called the police many times, but they never seemed to catch the bikers. Tank and his gang were always gone by the time the police arrived. The whole neighborhood lived in fear of when the bikers would show up next and who they would hurt. Marcus thanked Mrs. Patterson for the information and promised her that something would be done about Tank and his gang. The old woman looked at Marcus with hope in her eyes. Something about the way he spoke made her believe that he was different from other people who had promised to help but never did anything. Next, Marcus visited the small grocery store near the park. The owner, Mr. Kim, had been running his family business there for over 20 years. When Marcus asked about the bikers, Mr. Kim immediately looked around nervously to make sure no one else was listening. Mr. Kim whispered that Tank and his gang came to his store every few days, demanding free beer and cigarettes. If he refused to give them what they wanted, they would threaten to destroy his store. Last month, they had broken his front window when he told them he could not afford to keep giving them free things. The store owner was too scared to call the police because Tank had told him that bad things would happen to his family if he caused any trouble. Mr. Kim had a wife and 2 young daughters, and he could not risk their safety. He was trapped and felt helpless against the gang of bullies. Marcus asked Mr. Kim where the bikers usually went after they left his store. The frightened man told him that they always rode toward the old industrial part of town, where there were lots of abandoned buildings and empty warehouses. He had heard other customers talking about seeing the bikers hanging around a rundown bar called Devil's Den. Devil's Den was located in the worst part of the city where most businesses had closed down years ago. It was the perfect place for criminals to meet and plan their illegal activities without being bothered by police or regular citizens. Marcus wrote down the address and thanked Mr. Kim for his help. As Marcus drove through the neighborhood, he saw the damage that Tank and his gang had caused. Broken windows, graffiti on walls, and trash scattered everywhere. This had once been a nice, peaceful area where families felt safe, but now people were afraid to leave their homes. Marcus realized that hurting Bruno was just the latest in a long list of terrible things that Tank had done to innocent people. The big biker was a cancer that needed to be removed from this community before he hurt anyone else. That evening, Marcus returned to his apartment where Bruno was now resting comfortably on his favorite cushion. The veterinarian had released Bruno with strict instructions to keep him quiet for the next few days. The brave dog was wearing a protective cone around his neck, but his tail still wagged weakly when he saw Marcus come through the door. Marcus knelt down and gently petted Bruno, telling him what a good boy he was. The dog seemed to understand that his human was planning something important. Bruno had always been able to sense Marcus' moods, and right now he could feel that his owner was preparing for something big. While Bruno slept, Marcus made 3 very important phone calls to old friends from his military days. These were not ordinary friends, but highly trained specialists who had served alongside Marcus in some of the most dangerous places in the world. They had saved each other's lives many times and shared a bond that could never be broken. The first person Marcus called was Tommy Rodriguez. Tommy was a short, muscular man with dark hair and quick hands who had been the explosives expert in their unit. After leaving the military, Tommy had moved to Los Angeles, where he worked as a stunt coordinator for action movies. He knew how to make things explode safely on movie sets, but he also remembered how to use those skills for more serious purposes. When Marcus explained what had happened to Bruno, Tommy immediately became angry. Tommy had always loved animals and could not stand people who hurt innocent creatures. He told Marcus that he would be at his apartment within the hour and would bring whatever equipment they might need. The second call was to Sarah Mitchell. Sarah was a tall woman with blonde hair and ice blue eyes who had been the best sniper in their entire division. She could hit any target from incredible distances and never missed her mark. After the military, Sarah had opened a tactical training facility where she taught security guards and police officers how to shoot accurately. Sarah had met Bruno many times when she visited Marcus, and she considered the gentle dog to be part of their extended family. When Marcus told her about the attack, Sarah's voice became cold and deadly. She promised to bring her best equipment and meet them at Marcus' apartment as soon as possible. The third call was to James "Big Jim" Morrison. Big Jim was a massive man who stood nearly 7 feet tall and weighed over 300 pounds of pure muscle. During their military service, Big Jim had been their close combat specialist and could defeat multiple enemies at the same time using only his hands. Now he worked as a bodyguard for famous celebrities in Hollywood. Big Jim had always had a soft spot for dogs and had been planning to adopt one himself. When Marcus described how Tank had hurt Bruno with the chain, Big Jim actually growled like an angry bear. He told Marcus that anyone who would attack a defenseless animal deserved whatever punishment was coming to them. Within 2 hours, all 3 of Marcus' old teammates were sitting in his living room. They sat quietly around Bruno, who was sleeping peacefully, unaware that some of the most dangerous people in Los Angeles were planning to protect him and get justice for what had been done to him. Marcus showed his friends the information he had gathered about Tank and his gang. He had printed out photos, surveillance footage, and criminal records that painted a clear picture of the bikers' illegal activities. Tommy, Sarah, and Big Jim studied the evidence, carefully asking detailed questions about the gang's routines and weaknesses. The 4 friends spent the rest of the evening creating a detailed plan. They would use all of their military training and experience to teach Tank and his gang a lesson they would never forget. But they would be smart about it and make sure that justice was served without anyone getting seriously hurt. As the night grew later, the team finalized their strategy and prepared for what would happen the next day. Friday night arrived and Marcus' team put their carefully planned operation into action. They had spent 2 days watching Tank and his gang, learning their habits and routines. The bikers followed the same pattern every weekend, meeting at Devil's Den Bar around 9 o'clock to drink beer, play pool, and plan their next crimes. Sarah arrived at her position first. She climbed onto the roof of an old building across the street from Devil's Den, carrying a large black bag filled with surveillance equipment. From her high vantage point, she could see the entire area around the bar, including all the entrances and exits. Sarah set up her night vision cameras and radio equipment, then settled in to watch and wait. Tommy parked his van in an alley behind the bar and quietly made his way to the parking lot where the bikers' motorcycles were lined up in a row. He moved like a shadow between the bikes, using his small size and quick hands to plant tiny tracking devices under each motorcycle seat. The devices were no bigger than coins, but they would allow the team to follow the bikers wherever they went. Big Jim positioned himself near the back door of Devil's Den. His job was to make sure none of the bikers could escape if they tried to run away during the operation. Even though Big Jim was huge, he knew how to hide in dark corners and stay invisible until the right moment came. Marcus was the last member of the team to arrive at Devil's Den. He walked through the front door dressed in ordinary clothes, looking like just another customer who wanted a drink after a long week at work. The bar was dark and smoky with loud rock music playing from old speakers mounted on the walls. Devil's Den was exactly the kind of place Marcus had expected it to be. The floor was sticky with spilled beer, and the air smelled like cigarettes and unwashed bodies. Most of the customers looked like criminals or people who had given up on life long ago. It was the perfect hiding place for Tank and his gang of bullies. Marcus found an empty booth in a dark corner where he could watch everything that happened in the bar without being noticed. He ordered a beer from the unfriendly bartender and pretended to read a newspaper while keeping his eyes on Tank and his 4 gang members. The bikers were playing pool at a table near the center of the bar. They were already drunk and getting louder as the night went on. Tank was bragging to his friends about different people he had hurt over the years. He seemed especially proud of the story about attacking Bruno with his chain. Marcus listened carefully as Tank described how much he had enjoyed hitting the innocent dog. The big biker laughed as he told his friends about the look of fear in Marcus' eyes when Bruno fell to the ground bleeding. Tank said it was one of the most fun things he had done in weeks. The other gang members cheered and bought Tank more drinks to celebrate his cruelty. They talked about planning more attacks on people and animals in the neighborhood. One of them suggested they should go back to the park the next morning to see if they could find more victims to hurt. Marcus' hand tightened around his beer bottle as he listened to their evil plans. It took all of his self-control not to walk over to their table and start the fight right there in the crowded bar. But he knew that would ruin the careful plan his team had created. Around midnight, Tank announced that it was time to leave Devil's Den. He told his gang that they had business to take care of at their warehouse hideout across town. The 5 bikers finished their drinks and started walking toward the door, completely unaware that they were being watched and tracked. Sarah's voice came through Marcus' earpiece confirming that all the bikers were heading toward their motorcycles. The trap was about to be sprung. Tank and his gang rode their motorcycles through the empty streets toward the old warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. The area was full of abandoned buildings and broken streetlights, creating perfect hiding spots in the darkness. The bikers had no idea that Marcus and his team had arrived at the warehouse 30 minutes earlier using the tracking devices to follow their route. The warehouse Tank had chosen for their meeting was a massive concrete building that had been empty for years. Broken windows lined the walls and weeds grew through cracks in the parking lot. It was the kind of place where criminals could conduct their illegal business without being disturbed by police or curious neighbors. Marcus' team had used their military training to position themselves strategically around the building before the bikers arrived. Sarah had found a spot on a fire escape where she could see the entire warehouse floor through the broken windows. Tony had placed small devices near all the entrances that would create bright flashes of light and loud noises when activated. Big Jim waited near the back door, ready to stop anyone who tried to escape. Marcus himself had entered the warehouse through a hole in the roof and now stood hidden in the shadows near some old machinery. He watched as Tank gang parked their motorcycles outside and walked through the front door laughing and joking about their plans for the weekend. The 5 bikers spread out across the empty warehouse floor, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. Tank was still bragging about hurting Bruno and talking about finding more innocent victims to terrorize. He pulled out his metal chain and swung it through the air, pretending to hit imaginary dogs and people. Marcus felt his anger growing as he watched Tank play with the same weapon that had hurt his beloved Bruno. But he forced himself to stay calm and wait for the right moment. This operation had to be executed perfectly to make sure justice was served without anyone getting seriously hurt. Tank gang was discussing their plans to rob Mr. Kim grocery store the next week. They laughed about how scared the store owner had looked when they threatened his family. One of the bikers suggested they should also vandalize Mrs. Patterson's house just for fun, since the old woman had been asking too many questions about their activities. That was when Marcus decided it was time to act. He pressed a button on his radio, sending a signal to his teammates. Within seconds, Tommy devices activated, filling the warehouse with blinding flashes of light and deafening sounds that confused and disoriented the bikers. The gang members stumbled around in the darkness, unable to see or hear properly. Sarah used her precision skills to fire small rubber bullets that hit each biker in non-lethal spots, causing them to fall down without causing serious injury. The bullets hurt enough to stop them from fighting back, but would not leave permanent damage. Big Jim appeared from the shadows and quickly overpowered two of the smaller gang members, using his martial arts training to restrain them with plastic zip ties. Tommy emerged from his hiding spot and used his technical skills to disable the motorcycles so the bikers could not escape even if they managed to get outside. One by one, Tank gang members were captured and secured until only their leader remained standing in the center of the warehouse. Tank spun around wildly, trying to figure out what was happening to his friends. The big biker was no longer laughing and joking. Fear had replaced the cruel confidence he had shown all night. Marcus stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light coming through the broken windows. Tank's eyes went wide when he recognized the man whose dog he had attacked that morning. The biker had thought Marcus was just another weak victim, but now he realized he had made a terrible mistake. Tank reached for his metal chain, but his hands were shaking too much to grip it properly. He was face to face with someone far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Tank stood alone in the middle of the empty warehouse, surrounded by his unconscious gang members. The big biker, who had seemed so tough and scary just hours before, now looked small and frightened as Marcus walked slowly toward him. The dim light from the broken windows created long shadows that made Marcus appear even more intimidating than he really was. Marcus did not need to shout or make threats. His calm, quiet voice was far more terrifying than any screaming could have been. He spoke to Tank in the same gentle tone he used when talking to Bruno, but there was something deadly underneath the softness that made Tank blood run cold. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Tank several photographs. The first picture was of Bruno lying on the ground bleeding after Tank had hit him with the metal chain. The second photo showed Bruno at the veterinary hospital, with bandages covering his injuries. Tank tried to look away, but Marcus forced him to stare at what he had done to the innocent dog. Then Marcus showed Tank pictures of all the other victims in the neighborhood. There was Mrs. Patterson crying next to her destroyed garden. There was Mr. Kim standing in front of his broken store window. There were photos of scared children who were afraid to play outside because of Tank and his gang. Each picture told the story of lives that had been damaged by the bikers' cruelty. Marcus explained to Tank that he knew everything about his real life. His full name was Derek Mason, and he had been arrested 17 times for assault, robbery, and drug dealing. Marcus had copies of all the police reports and witness statements that proved Tank was guilty of dozens of crimes that he had never been properly punished for. Tank tried to act tough and tell Marcus that he was not afraid, but his voice was shaking and sweat was running down his face. He had spent his whole life bullying people who could not fight back, but now he was facing someone with real training, real skills, and real power to make his life very difficult. Marcus told Tank that he had already prepared a complete file of evidence about the gang illegal activities. The file included photographs, video recordings, and witness statements that would be enough to send Tank and his friends to prison for many years. Marcus had contacts in the police department who would make sure the evidence reached the right people. But Marcus offered Tank a choice. He could spend the next 10 years in prison, where he would discover what it felt like to be the victim instead of the bully. Or he could leave Los Angeles immediately and never return. If Tank chose to leave, he would have 24 hours to pack his belongings and disappear forever. Tank quickly chose to leave the city rather than face years in prison. Marcus tied him up with rope and left him with a note explaining everything to the police, who would arrive in 1 hour. The note included all the evidence of the gang crimes and the location where Tank could be found. Marcus and his team left the warehouse and drove back toward the city. Their mission was complete, and justice had been served without anyone being seriously hurt. Tank would face the consequences of his actions, and the neighborhood would finally be safe from his reign of terror. 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in the same park where the attack had happened. Bruno was running around chasing squirrels with his usual energy and enthusiasm. The protective cone was gone, and his fur had grown back over the scar where Tank chain had hit him. The brave dog showed no signs of fear or trauma from his ordeal. Mrs. Patterson waved at them from her bench by the pond. Mr. Kim had sent a thank you card expressing his gratitude for getting rid of the bikers who had been threatening his family. The entire neighborhood felt safe and peaceful again, now that Tank and his gang were gone forever. Marcus watched Bruno play happily in the sunshine and smiled, knowing that sometimes the best way to deal with bullies is to speak their language, but with better training, superior tactics, and a righteous cause worth fighting for.